The planet's puppet masters almost surely have a plan. There's clearly maybe something there beyond the realm of man. Until we've thoroughly tested every last close-chested view, I find the more we think we know, the less we really do. Where would we be without THC? 'Cause we know they're lying to us, just don't know to what degree. Where would we be without THC? The Higher Side Chat Show, Greg Carlwood and Company.
Well, it is a beautiful day in the neighborhood. From the Sunshine State, I'm Greg Carlwood. And when researchers say that the puppet masters of the predator class are involved in a secret occult religion, or playing a different game from the rest of us, or making their moves from a different level of reality, what do they really mean? We hear theories about the transactional nature of blood sacrifice, the alchemical transmutation of value that drives maybe the world's most effective magic trick, fractional reserve debt-based banking, and we hear how the big secret behind ufology would break the collective mind if humanity were ever to have it revealed. We also frequently see the encoding of symbols and numbers into highly charged ritual events, which at least tells us there's some occulted communication happening that delivers entirely different messages from the same incident for those who have been read in. What if I told you it seems like our biggest problems come down to some very specific principles of the natural world and the puppet master's success in hijacking them, inverting them, and hiding them away from the rest of us? Well, today's returning guest, the author, historian, and renegade archaeologist Dr. Heather Lynn, certainly thinks this is the case, and the direction of her recent Substack pieces under the H-Files banner and her recent podcast through the Midnight Academy both get to the heart of these very ideas. Her books include Evil Archaeology, Demons, Possessions, and Sinister Relics, Baphomet Revealed, Mysteries and Magic of the Sacred Icon, The Anunnaki Connection, Sumerian Gods, Alien DNA, and the Fate of Humanity, and The Anunnaki Revelation, Hidden History, Altered States, and the Mystery of Humanity. You can find all her work and more at drheatherlynn.com, and it is a pleasure to have her back for number 3, the thrice great academic double agent, sorcerarchy, exposer, and rebel with a cause, Dr. Heather Lynn. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, really, really great to have you here. I cannot believe how much work you're putting in to these threads that have been interesting to me for a while. I'm going to go a little outside of what we planned to talk about, clearly from that intro, because you just released this piece in the time since we booked this that really is a masterpiece. The Arms Race for the Holy Grail, Epstein, Peter Thiel, and the Mathematical Formula for Immortality. And the reason this piece speaks to me so deeply is more for the backstory than the headline, because some of my favorite work is the stuff that goes into this connective tissue between the alchemy of banking and energy production and the engineering of scarcity in a world of abundance. Tracy Twyman has the book, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, that touches on this. Dr. Joseph Farrell has Microcosm and Medium, one of his wildest books that gets into this stuff. It really is a core factor in exposing a template, or you say a principle or an equation that has been applied to all areas of our lives, and it really is the source of their quote-unquote magic. Can you break people into some of the background context that this piece is about?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk. I think we're all familiar with disclosure. So you mentioned a few other authors who have talked about this and circled the topic in different ways. And I am coming at it, I think, from a different angle by accident because of just the field that I've been in, or the niche. So the niche has been like ufology, because, I've written about the Anunnaki, so that automatically puts you in like an ancient aliens category. Of course, I've been on the show, so it just seems to be in that realm. But as you know, my work isn't really categorized as that so much as it is the occulted knowledge, the frameworks that go beneath civilization. And that started as my work as an economic historian and during my master's. And so it's strange sometimes to think of things like Anunnaki or ancient gods having anything to do with that, but it's sort of important. And so some of the ways that I've come to, I don't want to say conclusions, but maybe we'll just say hypotheses about what's going on, comes through that maybe back door of ancient civilizations, or even things like etymology, word origin, And I know that's kind of a big fun thing that people like Jordan Maxwell has made popular over the years. And it's one of those things too that is ripe for misconstruction and also distraction, because people will say, hey, well, this word sounds like this word, so they're probably connected. And then when you look into it, though, it's actually maybe not. I mean, there's only so many sounds a person can make. And so sometimes they converge, but there is a science of etymology. And so I follow those things. And I guess I just look at this in a different way. And in that realm of ufology, you hear free energy thrown around all the time. Like that is kind of the quest. If you wanted to call it like the Holy Grail, I think you could. And like many things I've done when it comes to, say, the Anunnaki, people are like, are there stargates? And I'm like, I don't know, what is a stargate is the question.
Right.
Or can people be possessed by demons? Well, first of all, what is a demon? So I think the crux of what I've been doing is trying to take Occam's razor, trying to get down to understand the language we're using and fundamentally understand how we can reimagine what that means. Because I think that's a big problem that's hitting most fields, not just like the alternative, so to speak, but even just in generic academia. There's this siloing of information. And so as a result, my first interest in looking into these maybe economic or financial areas came from, strangely enough, ufology with this idea of free energy. So I'm thinking, okay, when you think what is free energy, a lot of times you'll get people saying or implying even that it's just this really great technology that will enable us to get to the stars. We're going to fly all over the place and we're going to be able to basically have more accessible and effective transportation. Okay, great. There's also the threat that it has to the economic system because of the petrodollar and energy. So, I mean, that makes sense too. Great. But at some level, and maybe this is just my gut and that's it, but that's where we start to build a hypothesis, is you're supposed to kind of have that gut feeling, contrary to what the scientific materialists say, where you just kind of go and look over the research and then do a meta-analysis. And then, no, we've lost the creativity in science. And so what I still try to do is, if I have a gut feeling, look into it a little bit, don't ignore that, and then try to validate it or cross-validate it or invalidate it or however, but I'm not going to ignore that hunch. And so the hunch was, is it really just that? I mean, not that that's small, not that it's small to be able to hop in a, spaceship and fly around. But also the question is, can our bodies even do that? Okay. But aside from that, so what if they have the ability to have like constant electricity and constant energy? Sure, our economic engine will just run, but is that it? And you can answer, well, yeah, because it's about the money. But what is money? Is that it? I mean, Is this really all it is? Is it all about money? And of course, the cynic will say, of course it is. It's always about money. Then the question is, well, what is money? And, we have the answers to that. That's easy. Go look in a book, we know. But I really kind of like pressed that deeper and thought, it's about energy, free energy, currency, the current. Yes. And so then, of course, my background being history is looking at, well, it all goes back to Sumer in the end. And where did money come from? And then there's many different places money, could have been and was. And like, it's not like the trading system hadn't happened before the Sumerians, but the Sumerians codified it and expanded it. And really, I would say, kind of started perfecting it. And they linked it to things that are also energetic, like sex, food, the sun, whatever. So, and then now you're getting like sort of a religious framework starting when you think of it that way. And so in my interest in seeking the root of like, what is money? It's energy. And I'll admit this, like years ago, I took some classes that were in finance and global finance. And it was like, it was sort of for a certificate. And it was not, I don't claim it as a credential because it's kind of silly, but it was interesting. It was from UBS and it was about fintech and stuff because I was just interested. And one of the things that struck me when they were teaching in the very first course, they were saying something about how it's so important to understand global markets because it's really about unleashing the creativity of the human potential. And you're able to manipulate that, energy and that creativity. And it's really and it was really a strange way to open a class. And this wasn't it was one of these like online classes. So it wasn't like a legit, it was legit, but it wasn't legit. But it was like a thing you could get a certificate through the UBS, the bank system. And so I was just curious, like, what are they teaching? And so from their perspective, so they're not teaching like real just here are the numbers. They were first coming out at it with this like weird, like moral framework. Like, we as the global bankers are designing a way that we can unleash the potential of, like, it was just really self-serving. So that kind of always stuck in my head as a weird way that these people think they're self-important, that they're managing the creative flow of people's ideas, and that it was just more than just, hey, they're skimming off the top. So a lot of those things were speaking to me, and I started looking, and I've been haunted. I'll say I've been haunted lately about the disclosure thing, also the push towards different religions. There's this idea, and this is going to make everybody mad, and I don't really care. Everybody's being pushed to Christianity right now.
Preach.
And I'm not saying no one should be Christian. I'm not saying I don't care what people are. I'm saying when somebody's pushing something, even if you like it, you just have to ask who's doing the pushing and why. And so when you kind of put it all like in the context, you say these individuals are being pushed through the media. Again, people that are, I think, kind of having a great message. But my like approval of what they may be saying is not the barometer of what's right. And neither is it yours or anybody else's. So we have to look not at that, but we have to back it off and say, why are they trying to tell us this? Because they can tell us anything. Why are they choosing this? And so I started this different track, and it all kind of did come down to things about energy, things about different types of energy, the flow of the energy, the control of the energy, and different fields, so to speak, whether those are legitimate academic fields or also what may be considered illegitimate, like ufology. So the question then is, what is going on? And I obviously looked through the Epstein files like everybody's been doing. And I started looking for different keywords like entropy, So that pulled up some interesting things that started putting it together for me a little bit.
Yes, and I do plan to ask you about that. But when we go to the context of these elite, this management class, they're in concert and communication with some kind of other force, their gods, the way they extract occult power, like this relationship where it seems like you give me something, I'll give you something. And yes, there are claims of weird devices and circuit boards placed out in the desert for these people to find. But when I think technology, go back further. And it's like we hear that the Anunnaki or these gods civilized man and gave us the sciences and math and all this stuff. Well, we think about science as different today than we might have in the past. Like this piece you wrote is more about they gave us the science, or they gave these elite the science of hijacking the energy flow of the natural world. That's the knowledge that they gave them. It's not like algebra. I mean, it might be algebra also, but it's the science of how to break reality and extract wealth. And it's kind of like a garden. Like if you have a garden, the high producers, you give them more water, you give them more fertilizer, you get something from them, and then in turn, they yield more fruit. If we are property, as Charles Fort would say, if we are food for these beings, this management class are the gardeners, and they cause us to be more agitated and stressed out. They generate the negative emotions, the loosh, and in return, they were given the keys to the castle. They were given the formula for creating more scarcity, more stress, more negative emotion on the planet. And that's how we generate this energy. I mean, this is kind of the paradigm that a lot of people from David Icke on down circle around. And I feel like you're kind of filling in the gaps of the broad strokes with actual details. I just really like it. I mean, even agriculture, as we've said, that's considered this great, big, amazing thing. Well, maybe it's also a trap. Why weren't they planting giant fruit trees that yield every year? With annual crops, there are haves and have-nots. There's storehouses. The king redistributes everything. This is control. So it's hijacking abundance and using the sliver of it that is most controllable and introducing that to society and saying it's a good thing. I just want to quote you here. You say, in terms of like how important these codes or the secret knowledge might actually just be an equation for how to hijack reality, you say, the Pythagoreans drowned a man for leaking a mathematical truth. The Freemasons encoded geometry into a global fraternal order. Peter Thiel is funding the quest to defeat death. Jeffrey Epstein called it harvesting. The UFO community calls it free energy. Physicists call it entropy. These are not separate stories.
Right.
And I love that. Just Tell us the tale of entropy and why it is so important. I think people have a vague idea of what it means, but they probably don't have it dialed in exactly right.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually part of the whole psyop is that we don't understand what it means exactly at all. So this is where I think it gets really interesting and has to be defined really well, because when we start talking about these maybe cool, occult, esoteric subjects, and then you throw in words like entropy or talk about math, all of us have been trained to sort of check out even if we don't realize it. That's by design. So the idea of entropy has been around since the 1800s. It was a German physicist that initially named it, but it was about a principle that governs all energy flow. And so it was based on the second law of thermodynamics. And so it's a kind of a thing in physics. And then there was 1948, there was a mathematician, though, that started to work on something not really related, but as we'll see, it's all related. He was working in the field of communication and information. And so he needed an equation, though. And this is fundamental here. The idea of the equation, the math being the quantitative proof of everything that underlies reality. Back to the Pythagoreans, the idea that they believed that number was everything. It was the universe. It was reality. Everything was about the number. So math was the key to understanding all things, which I think a lot of us kind of know. But in any case, this particular scientist was trying to figure out this idea of entropy in systems of communication. And he asked his colleague, who was a mathematician, John von Neumann, what to call this like basic principle. And von Neumann, he said, quote, call it entropy because nobody really knows what entropy means. So in a debate, you will always have the advantage. Yeah. So jargon. Okay. We have legalese. You know, when you go into some trouble with the law, they're going to throw legal terms all around and hope for the best. Same with academia, academies. There's all this like tricks with language. So many tricks with language. And as you see, the word entropy in some cases is just used in order to explain a phenomenon just because, you know, hey, you'll always win the argument if people don't know what they're arguing against.
Yes.
That's why understanding the terms that we're using and building our reality upon is essential. So that's the real story there. And so now you have the idea of entropy coming from energy, you know, what's lost, basically like the friction. It's the something has to give in this system.
The loss of energy, the decay.
Yes, it's just the decay. And so instead of saying something more just understandable, we're going to call it entropy, which, yeah, it's fine. We'll say entropy. But then we have to go in other fields and we're going to use those words, borrow from those, and then kind of we're circling the same idea though at its end. And then you have the idea of entropy in biological systems as well. So at all levels, you have entropy being thrown around as a very important thing. And this is where I think the free energy question kind of gets it right in a way. The idea of asking about free energy, as we know about like the second law of thermodynamics about energy, you know, we all, I think, understand it. It can't be created or destroyed. So how is it free? What's going on? What is really happening here? And why does it have to do with Epstein and the quest that they have for understanding entropy, for understanding data, information exchange? Like you were saying, there's all of these different systems that are built on people kind of being the middleman, going in between and extracting value from things where they weren't creating the value. You know, when they say they're job creators, they're not necessarily creating much. They're repositioning because you're expending energy. We're all expending energy. They're trying to catch this whole entropy, the skim, what it is that the loss could be. And so you have all of these different entropies. It's the same idea in all of these different fields. And the one that is really underpinning of this, that goes back to Sumer, agriculture, and all of that, is economic entropy. And that is friction. And that is like seen in transaction costs. So every time energy moves through a system, it could be a power grid, it could be a financial market or a temple economy or something. There is somebody, usually a priest class there, positioned just right to skim off of that. So the energy is flowing and there's going to be, So if you were to rub your hands together, the heat dissipates. There's some heat loss there. So there's movement, there's a loss. Who's capturing that loss? Every civilization sort of understood that, at least in Western civilization. They understood some level of this principle, this basic understanding. And they encoded it in such a way that they did, which would be relating it to gods, relating it to the natural world, but also trying to understand it. So whereas we're saying words like maybe entropy, they may have used other words that fit within their framework of understanding, like Saturn, Saturn who devours his children. And people will come at me and say, well, no, Saturn means this. This is fine. All of these things are legitimate. We're talking about a span of time going so far and then also over different cultures and understandings and relationships with the religious syncretism, etc. And it's like the Joseph Campbell hero with 1,000 faces. I'm looking for the hero underneath. We can talk the faces. We can say, well, he didn't really have that, big of a nose, or maybe his eyes were, this is all fine. And you could be right to nail it down to when the hero got, a larger nose or a smaller nose. But that's the distraction. We really need to go underneath to look at the basic principle here.
Yes, it's like these people are in the ancient world. They're embedded in their environment much more than we are in an unadulterated environment. And they acknowledge, they notice, or they're taught that things in nature decay and waveforms and signals degrade. That's that second element that you were talking about. Well, it's like there's just leakage in the system. So stopping the leakage is one thing. Maybe they are trying to still uncover how to exactly do that, but you can become the leakage. You can become the siphon of that leakage, and that is what they've done. Position themselves in the position of collecting that leakage all throughout history in every way they can think of to do it. That's what taxes are, as you say. Like, they're just extracting a little leakage from the system that they made that is in line with the natural order of things, which is like energy produces the green paper, and then we get a little bit of our green paper back. They're mimicking natural systems that they've observed and capitalizing on them. Now, this is another part I like. You say the brotherhoods of hidden math, and you go into why it's the core hidden truth of secret societies, saying Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Templars, it's all the same. Quote, the Templars were the most powerful financial intermediaries in medieval Europe and the custodians of mathematical and architectural knowledge acquired through direct contact with the Islamic world, which had preserved and advanced Babylonian and Greek mathematics for centuries. Whether they literally venerated an idol called Baphomet matters less than what the accusation reveals. They were guarding knowledge that the church and the crown could not control, and they were destroyed for it. Then came the Royal Society, whose early members were nearly all Freemasons, who formalized the scientific method while maintaining private alchemical practices. In every case, the outer presentation is spiritual and fraternal, but the inner structure is mathematical. The knowledge being guarded is not a philosophy, it's a formula. I love that. And it speaks to a recent interview I did with Bob Grenier, who is big in the fusion alternative energy space. I mean, what he was spouting out was just way over my head, but it shows you there's a there. But a part that was interesting is he presents pins and medals from his father or grandfather, I think it was, who was a high-ranking Freemason, and he would show these medals and say, look at these symbols and the patterns and the framing of the medal. They are energy patterns. He would say they're the same energy patterns that they see in the lab. So this just had all my neurons firing, and it's right in line with what you're saying is the big secret that they're hiding is hijacking the natural systems, and like none of this is in our education at all, anywhere.
Oh no, never.
So clearly it's been weaponized, and I just love that the Pythagoreans drowning a man for leaking a mathematical truth, like things that seem arbitrary to us because we don't even know how to use them, are the actual keys to cracking reality, and they've had them for a long time.
And I think that plays a big role into why we're not taught math well. People say it's this epidemic of, it's so hard, and we have to have STEM, and it's just not the case. If you think about the geniuses of our past, the ones who had no computers or calculators, and they were able to not only almost master math, but create different types of math, create algebra, create calculus, and all of these things with just pencil and paper. And it's just, we're so dumbed down, and it's just not an accident. It's so that we don't understand the deeper levels of everything. And then when we hear words, then like, oh, it's the math, it's, oh. But no, it's so important because the math underlies everything. It's the quantifiable truth. It's how things are measured. And if you can measure it, then you can own it. That is what the measurement is. The crux of civilization, the very beginning of civilization, has to be this question of valuation. You have to be able to say, this is bigger than that, or this is worth more than that. And so that is a judgment call. We make judgments. That is what this whole, like the good and evil, we now have the ability to know good and evil. It's knowing plus versus minus, like the linear scale of like what is something is net good or net bad. It's just this discernment of the binary. So if you are the God, you're able to be the ultimate judge, and then you render a verdict. Well, the most basic example of this in a practical sense would be, how do we know how big a foot is? It seems random. Well, I mean, it could be anything. We can use anything to measure against another thing. It has to be then subjective. And that, of course, is the problem. And that's a postmodernist argument, is that, well, it's all subjective, isn't it? Well, yes, and that's a whole other story. But the way that we were able to function and actually create a system is there had to be rules laid out. And those rules were based on what an elite person was. So like the foot of the king was literally how big a foot was. And then so you could see eventually that became problematic with continuity. But then we developed different math and things, but it had to be something that could be observable, that everybody else could agree on. That's sort of the idea of blockchain too, which was also an ancient development. So the idea that something, its value has to be at least transparent enough that everyone can observe it to say it's objectively true. And so math fits into that. Even now in just the sciences, you have the soft sciences and the hard sciences. And then you have the soft sciences are the qualifying research. You put your subjective ideas into it. You can't necessarily prove it. The hard sciences are only hard because they have that hardcore math behind them. I can show you like graphs and charts and formulas. And once we have that, then it can be a predictive model. That's where the power comes in, because then you're like omnipotent. You have these godlike powers where if you understand, you're going to be able to predict the future. You're going to have this like all-knowing kind of sensibility about you. So the idea of who gets to determine what the measurement is or what the value is an essential part of it all. So that takes math. Math is the sacred art of telling us, the nature of reality. And that's why they don't really want us to know. But it's also why these different fields, these different areas of research are siloed and compartmentalized. However, there are individuals at the top that kind of pull the strings of this. They're either the ones funding it or the Epstein broker class that are interested in using scientists to sort of do this research. And what they do is they'll fund, say, like a biologist. They'll fund, somebody in engineering, and they give them the money to look for a certain thing. And they're all like the blind man and the elephant parable. They're all holding a piece of it. They don't see what they're actually holding, but they can report back their findings. And then those people at the top are able to say, we're the ultimate peer review. We're going to look at it and say, where do we identify the fundamental truths of all of this emerging from all of these fields? Because if we know it all, then we can control it all. And that is a lot of what you see in these Epstein emails, especially when he's going into these discussions with these scientists about life extension technology. Because again, free energy, is it about flying around in spaceships or getting off the petrol dollar? Or is free energy the thing that means we can live forever at zero cost?
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, well said. Bob Grenier seemed to think it was definitely related. And you say in this post, like maybe the big secret is that energy was always supposed to be free. That's kind of what I get at when like you engage with the real world. Abundance is there. Like it really is crazy how much yield you will get from anything you plant, or having 5 chickens. I mean, I have bowls of eggs that I know my family's not going to get through from 5 chickens. It's like abundance is there in the natural world, but we have these intermediaries where we never even engage with the source itself. When was the last time you planted anything? When was the last time you even walked around outside with your shoes off? It's like there's a lot of cascading benefits from just moving a wheelbarrow of dirt from one side of a property to another side. But we don't do that. Instead, we pay a gym money to simulate that activity where we're not getting our hands in the dirt. So we're not getting that benefit. We're not getting the sunlight benefit. If you walk with shoes that actually ground you, that's another benefit. So when people say we live in a simulation, it's like, well, this is a simulated activity right here. Here's the natural shepherds of the earth, stewards of the earth way a human being should operate within the dirt, and just a small task of, permaculture creation, creating your own little space. And instead, we are simulating that activity in a way that has only just one benefit to your muscles, I guess, and the whole cascade is just cut out. It's like, intermediaries all the way down. So I wanted to throw this out. Not like we need a new term for the puppet masters of the power pyramid. Some call them the cult, like David Icke. We got the parasite class, the predator class, the elite. People don't like that one because it kind of gives them a higher, it insinuates that they're better than us. But you had to go and use another new term. You call them the broker class. So here you write, if entropy is the tax the universe levies on every energy transfer, then the broker class is the entity that positions itself as the tax collector. Go back to the Sumerian temple economy. Grain comes in from the fields, solar energy stored as wheat. The temple receives it, records it, redistributes it. In exchange, the temple provides access to the divine, oracles, blessings, sacred rites. Agricultural energy converts to monetary energy, converts to spiritual energy. The cycle is closed and self-sustaining until someone captures the flow. The moment the intermediary class begins extracting more than it returns, the system shifts from circular to linear, from regenerative to extractive. The temple still stands, the rituals still run, the priest still presides. The difference is invisible to the worshiper, but fatal to the system. Energy flows in, less energy flows out. The surplus accrues to the intermediary. This is the pattern that repeats at scale in every civilization. Venetian bankers, the Medici, the East India Company, central banking. In every case, the institution positions itself as the point of energy transfer and takes a cut. They don't generate energy because energy cannot be created or destroyed. They insert themselves into the transfer and take their cut. They are the friction. And you go on to talk about this. And then you say, this is why free energy is a dangerous phrase, not because of generators, but because of what it implies for every intermediary structure on Earth. And you are really killing it. The flip side is just how abundant the unadulterated world would really be, or if we found a way to make that intermediary feed back into the system for the collective good of everyone rather than extracted by the newly termed broker class.
Yeah, they actually have an even worse term for themselves, though, and that is the aristopopulists.
Oh,
I don't want to have gross, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of bad, yeah. No, and it's important to know that this is like the system that we're actually pushed into. And once you see it, you'll see it. You'll just never see it other way. Okay, so like for instance, this Uber, okay, Instacart, DoorDash, Patreon, and of course I'm on Substack. So even Substack, it doesn't matter if you like the thing; it is just the thing. Peter Thiel built his entire wealth and his entire business and everything off of this idea. And it wasn't by any kind of accident. He was very much influenced by a French literary critic named René Girard. And that is, if I could recommend any reading, that would be it. Read René Girard, because Thiel was his acolyte. It's just, he's said it openly. He is just doing everything in honor of this man who was, his advisor at Stanford. And so now Girard doesn't necessarily have bad ideas by any means. It's amazing. His work is amazing. It's what Thiel sort of does with these ideas and his idea of taking it and just running with it through society. And so there's a lot there with Girard's ideas having to do with sacrifice is a way to, this is his big thing, is that essentially the idea of sacrifice is the way that the societies relieve social entropy. They manage it through sacrifice. Then he talks about the scapegoat, the idea of a scapegoat. And so he goes through, and his work is amazing too. It does have to do with the concept of sacrifice, which I've also written about, and it is linked to that in a very real way. However, Thiel's sort of like many academics that we've seen over the years, they go in and learn philosophy, they're taken by it, And instead of just, working through it and still trying to understand it, they go put it out into what they call praxis. They go put it out into the world like a cake that's not done baking. And then disaster unfolds because we're their guinea pigs, essentially. And so if you have the money to back it up, like Teal does, he's basically running his Girardian experiments on the whole society and positioning himself to do something very different than what we're used to. That's why I try to encourage people to break out of this left-right paradigm. It's not about leftists. It's not about right. It's not about even a particular religion. That's because these things, these isms have a stronghold on us. Those are things that are luxury beliefs. That term comes from sociology. It's a luxury belief. It means that when you have abundance, you can sit and start having, like, say, an HOA. You get into like, well, I think we should not have this sort of flower, or maybe you're arguing about things because of your level of abundance says you don't have to argue about the real things. And so even when we think that we're discussing religion or politics or anything like this in a philosophical sense, those are actually still luxury beliefs to have, because you need to put those aside for a minute when there is an existential threat to our actual lives and the lives of the planet, which there is because of the threat of nuclear disasters and eugenics, disease, everything you can imagine, an actual threat to our bodies. And once we solve that threat, then we can go back to sitting around, smoking a cigar and discussing philosophy, Christianity, Islam, whatever you want to talk about. But until then, we need to all get together and look at what is actually going on. And we need to see that what is actually going on is something that we don't even have a vocabulary for, not because it doesn't exist, but because it's not the ones that are being pushed in front of us. So when we use different terms like, the broker class or Aristopopulism or any of these things, or entropy, of course, we really have to pause and look at this in a different way. And Teal, he understood this and built an empire on this so-called skim. He built PayPal, which it captures the digital friction, the monetary friction. Anytime you make a purchase, a little bit goes to PayPal or a little bit goes here. All of these new systems, while we enjoy them and they have afforded us great opportunities, somebody at the top is skimming and they're basically doing not much. You could argue, well, no, they have big companies and people clock in and clock out. No, we all know that there is a difference between what the people at the very top of Silicon Valley are doing as they're siphoning off little bits and little bits off of all of our energy, our labor, our efforts, our creative efforts, everything, versus the regular person that may go actually clock into a factory and sweat.
Mm-hmm.
That's different.
Well said. I agree. And I just wanted to touch on the Epstein thing a little bit more because we've mentioned it a few times without going super hard into the details. But you found him speaking to some pretty high-level scientists specifically about entropy and even the idea that it is some form of communication almost, right?
Yes. So we have the Epstein emails. There's 4 of them that I found. There's many more, but the ones that I put in the blog, and I'm still going through them. And it's shocking because they're just continually circling these topics with different scientists all over the place. One is from Martin Nowak. He's a Harvard mathematical biologist. He runs the program for evolutionary dynamics. He emails Epstein asking if the exchange of entropy between physical systems is a form of communication. So kind of back to that original idea of entropy to begin with.
Yes.
He asks whether negentropy, talk about terms, he asks whether negentropy, so negative entropy, itself is a code. This is what's important, very important, because if it's a code, it can be decoded. So it may not be a natural consequence is what they try to propose, that perhaps there is not this inevitable idea that it's based on energy, that maybe it's something else that can be decoded. So Epstein funded this guy's program and Harvard investigated the whole thing after his arrest, but it didn't go here nor there. Then you have Leon Peshkin, Harvard systems biologist, and he was working on aging, of course, because everybody's into this longevity stuff. He writes about wanting to give people more time to play, and he's sort of just seemingly, what a lot of people would think, oh, we want to live forever. But Epstein writes back saying, he's actually not sure that anti-aging is a good thing, which is peculiar because he's funding all of this. And immediately you just run to the conclusion that, well, he's wealthy and he's funding this because he wants to live forever. Or is that the case? So he actually says, It's maybe not a good thing that aging is systematic. He says there are redundancies built in to make sure people die at the same age. And like in the Bible, he references max 2 to the 8th fold. And so then he asked, why isn't it just entropy? So now it's sort of like they're trying to figure out, is this entropy? Is this actually just entropy, aging, this idea of a loss of energy? Or is there a code that could be broken so that we don't even have, like, we'll own all of life? So I make the argument here about Saturn being the idea of Chronos, time, Chronos devouring his children. And if you just get the artwork out of your mind and just think about what these things could mean, at least to these individuals who talk about it, this general idea that the children are the creation. And we can get into, of course, Molech and all of that, but just all the way down to the bottom, the basic fundamentals, they're your creation. They take on a life aside from you and they perpetuate the species. They go on and arguably forever unless you stop the cycle. So time, though, stops the cycle. Time stops. Time intervenes. Saturn eats his children. Time destroys everything that you create eventually. That's entropy. So when people are saying like, oh, Thiel's the Antichrist or whatever, he's a lot of things, but he doesn't think he's the Antichrist. He thinks he's something completely different. Very specific, but he does think he's a power player in this. But what they're trying to do is actually fight against Saturn. And then, of course, you might say, no. The cults of Saturn, it's about Satan, and these guys are Satanists. Sure, fine. This is not their interpretation, though. They're interpreting something different. They're looking at Saturn as kind of an idea, a philosophical idea of time itself. They're fighting against time, destruction, and entropy. And so in this, they're doing it through code. And so he asks if aging is random decay or a program code, because the code can be broken. Then there's Lawrence Krauss, who's a physicist. They exchanged messages about gravity. Epstein proposes gravity isn't a fundamental force. It's mass settling into its most probable configuration. Entropy maximization is spatial curvature. So regardless of what that could mean to all of us just listening casually or whatever, they're pulling the same thread, but in different areas by design. And they're not in one big group necessarily trying to get to what Epstein really wants to know. He's just deploying this. Then you have Stephen Jurowsik. He writes to Epstein about the, quote, persistence of complexity across time. And that's an entropy problem, basically. And then Epstein has Mind Shift in 2010. And that was an actual organized, private, closed-door conference that spanned a couple days. And the whole thing was about encryption, decryption, new financial systems and emerging technologies, cryptanalysis, financial architecture, entropy, life extension, all of these different things. He did get people together to talk on these topics. And then a note Epstein writes to himself, he says, or at least he had a habit of writing things to send a note to self. But then there's one in this chain that's actually redacted. Like, we don't know who he sent this to, but he says, quote, find me the top code breaker, NSA type. And then end quote. Then he goes on to say, biology is a system of dynamic codes. That hidden order can be used for work only if decryption takes place. And in parentheses, he wrote, entropy. So when he was asked about it, he said, it's research. It's for a science foundation. So he didn't want people to necessarily key in on what he's doing. So he's looking for cryptologists to work on biological codes. They're trying to fight the very thing that they're profiting off of. Not because they're heroes. Now, remember that. I'm not implying that they're heroes by any means. The whole reason that they're positioning themselves, in my view, allegedly, but from my research and the research I plan to expose more of, is they are building a breakaway civilization in plain sight. And they've said this in their own words. And when I say they, I mean a lot of these technocratic elites. They refer to themselves, as I said before, as aristopopulists. And that's why it's like the real wolves in sheep's clothing, because you'll have this mechanism where they're saying we're libertarian, we're, free speech, we want alternative medias, we want alternative ideas. They're going against the grain and they're like populists, but at the same time, they're aristocrats. They want to be the ones who are running everything. So it's a very dangerous and tricky thing. And they're using Girardian techniques, Straussian techniques. to set up an alternative system. And as you could say, like, well, that'd be actually really great. And I think that's why there's a lot of people who, everybody may be a fan of, or we like the ideas of, or what they say. And you see they're aligned with Peter Thiel. And you say, well, wait, how is that? Well, because there's something else going on that's not so apparent. And it's this line that's been sold that is, they're all kind of bad. Everybody's bad. But Peter Thiel, he's actually trying to do something good by getting away from these ruling elites, by making a new system in the only way that is like mathematically possible, and basically jump ship over here to us. That's why Christianity is being leveraged, because, and this is from their own words, that if you try to get people to break away from a civilization, and then go to what? Go to nothing. They're not going to want to take a chance on something new. They want it to be something old and established. And so they're using Christianity as the guise to do this. It's not that all of a sudden J.D. Vance is a Catholic because he's compelled to be one. It's not because of all of that. It's because they need like a lifeboat that people recognize so that you'll jump ship over there and say, well, it is good, right? We're going to be okay, right? And they're building a control grid that's different because they're trying to take over like a coup. It's a corporate, aristocratic, elite oligarchy who is doing a coup against all the other systems, only though to create a new system that operates off of this skim.
Yeah, they just reposition themselves at the top of it, and it's mostly digital, it seems like. And I think about that line, sacrifice manages social entropy, and how that must guide a lot of the philosophy of false flags and routine wars. Like, oh, it's that time again, we got to issue in another war, because it seems like right now we're being pushed into World War III without even a good reason presented to us. At least have the dignity to blow up a building in DC or something, so we at least get mad and think that there's a reason to do this. Give me a false flag, at least, give me something. But the thing I think about is this exchange between the elite and like maybe an ethereal, metaphysical level above them. And it's just like, I kind of think maybe there could be something in there where it's like the reason why this new system, this technocratic system, has to come right along with World War III is like, you got to give the gods some loosh. You got to give them some blood sacrifice. And then they might give you the missing screws to your big machine that you're trying to build. And they might not, that hopefully it all just collapses. But I think that's the hope that these people have, is like by giving the sacrifice of us to their entities, that the entities will fill in the last few blank pieces of the puzzle for them.
Yes. And you don't have to be like, those individuals don't have to be religious or anything. They can not believe in the superstitious or whatever they may call it. They can be atheists, because at the end, they're pragmatists. They're looking at what could work. So, and in that, of course, you're going to get people of different ideologies and belief sets, but what's actually working behind it is that it just simply works. And that's how you can just kind of hold your nose and do it. It's working. And so, yes, that's how you can get a lot of people to get on board. It goes back similarly to this, like the Nazi Ahnenerbe and all of this, where if you were a person maybe in Berlin back in the day, and you're watching all of these like Hugo Boss, dressed individuals who are in positions of power, and they seem reasonable in their presentation. Maybe they're a little charismatic, but they're talking about policy and economics and whatever. You would never suspect that at least a portion of them are wearing robes in a castle, running around having like seances and whatnot. They would think that's crazy. That's not happening. And nor did everybody in the Nazi party even do that. So that's what we're looking at, is don't look at these individuals, anybody. And I think we all are aware of this now, that we're not looking at anybody in a position of power anymore and thinking that they have it together. Quite the opposite, thankfully. But I think that there are some that believe they're worshiping an actual entity. And I think there's some that really don't care. They may not buy into that at all. They just want the results. And there's everything in between. And that's why it can be so effective, is it's siloed, it's compartmentalized, and it's hierarchical in and of itself. But the real issue too is this energy force that they're trying to take from us, which like Monroe, the loosh, I think that's a really good way of putting it, because we don't really know what it is. There's been talk since, Eliphas Levi, and before we have all these different words like animal magnetism, and back to Nazis, we have vril, we have animus, we have however you want to say it. We all kind of know there's something immaterial that's there. And that is another thing that when you look at the exchange between Epstein and Bannon when they were having an interview, it was funny to see Epstein kind of talk about his belief in God, or at least a soul. So he had some understanding or some idea of the materialist versus, maybe a metaphysical approach. But I think something then that is even more important when it comes to that is not the argument of, is there something more, isn't there, which is an important argument. But right now, in the time of war that we're in, looking at what is the benefit or utility of having so many people all of a sudden begin feeling very spiritual. And I'm for it, by the way. I want people to feel that there's something more, but they do too. There's a movement that says so too. Peter Thiel wants that. Epstein wanted that. Why? It is, in my view, and the view of some of the philosophers that they, are very much interested in, is that when you pull away from scientific materialism, you can now have chaos. You have a people who have a lack of understanding. Even if their understanding isn't accurate, it's still a sense of stability. So you're not looking for people. You can just say, it's just science. Okay, well, that is something they don't want anymore. And of course, you might hear that and say, good, I don't want that either. This is the trick that they're pulling. Because if you have so many people saying, we don't know what it is anymore, we're just like peasants from back in the day. Who knows what science is? We need answers. We have anxiety about that. So many people want answers. They are positioning themselves to be the ones with those answers. They want the alien ideas. They want the Christian ideas, any ideas, and Islamic ideas too. It's not even one system. It's currently they're using a particular system, but they don't care. They want us to believe in some sort of supernatural thing that they say they are the mediators of, because then we can't prove them wrong. Now we're stuck.
And that is kind of what I've said recently, because I've had on some guests who are Christian leaning, and then I've had on David Icke, who's like, Christianity has been weaponized and it's part of the big psyop. And so, people don't like to have their religious fundamental beliefs confronted so aggressively like that. I understand, but they're basically saying, we need you to have a belief, and then we can work with that. You figure out what the belief is, identify with it, and then we can channel that however we want. Whereas if you're just an individual free thinker, which I know is like Gnostic and scary to some people,
right.
It's like, it's really hard to pin me down. It's hard to find out what I'm even about because I don't necessarily advertise it. And I just think more people should be like that, because when you adopt liberal, Christian, any of these ideologies, they're like, I gotcha. I have just the solution. I know how to channel that. But if you don't know what you're working with, then it's a lot harder to do, especially with so many people. Now, I wanted to get into your post, Money, Sex, and Sorcery, Why Religions Use Ritual Sex. You highlight something that I didn't know, and I'm curious to hear more about it. I obviously already did because I read the post. But for those who didn't, the first money ever created was a temple token that bought access to a possessed prostitute. What's the story there?
That's kind of a bold claim, isn't it? Yeah. So I say a possessed prostitute because we hear a lot about temple prostitution, or at least people who are interested in the ancient world and that sort of thing. We hear temple prostitution. And that almost sounds nice. Like, oh, maybe they were just lovely ladies that like tended to the temple and they happen to be prostitutes. And then also the word prostitute is a weird one because you might think of like, a street hoe. She's just like a slut, whatever. She's doing stuff for money. We have no real understanding by design of what those things actually meant to the ancients, because there was a thing. It served a system. It was part of the system and it had a function. And it's still in some ways, it permeates different belief sets. And so it's very important to understand the idea of the currency of sex itself as an energy, kind of like loosh. It's all connected. And we know this from ritual magic and tantra and all of this, that there is an energy force behind the orgasm. And some people feel that you can capture that or that you could suppress it and then thereby capture it. And so we get all into a whole thing, but it starts, at least in history, the written record in Sumer, and it is associated with cash. So the oldest token currency is a Sumerian shekel. So not to be confused with just a shekel, but it was a Sumerian shekel specifically. And it goes back to 3000 BCE. And so it was specifically a token because it was used to pay for an evening with a lady of the night. But what her job was not just a good time. It wasn't frivolous. It was sacred prostitution. And so it's prostitution because you paid for the sex, but it's sacred because it functioned as a way to call down God. You experienced the divine. Now, how you got that was you had to bring a portion of your yearly wheat crop to this temple. And later, I mean, the same thing happens throughout with the Temple of Ishtar. It happens in Greece. It's part of the mystery tradition that you see echo and reverberate throughout. But at least in its very beginning, in Sumer, they were doing that as well. So you would actually, the temples were built on riverbeds. And so that was the current. You would get in a boat and you would bring your wheat and you would travel the flow of that current and you would end up at the temple. You would bring in your cash crop and you would give it as an offering to the temple, which would be an offering to the god. You would get that token and then you could be with God. And you could be with God through being with this woman. Now, how does this work? Well, she's possessed, and not like in a Regan. She wasn't spitting pea soup everywhere. It's the idea of what it is to have a God in you, to have enthusiasm, entheos, a deity inside, to channel something. So we could call it a lot of things. We could say you're channeling or you're inspired or it's the muse, but it's possession. There's a spiritual entity that is come inside you and you are no longer you, because the individual was bringing that to have an experience, not with some woman. He was experiencing God. And so the individual woman wasn't there. She was just the vessel where you could experience God. And that was what the money was for. And then even on the cash, on the coins itself, it shows these gods and the wheat and that sort of thing. And so the first money, was a temple token made for this sexual encounter that was to bring God down. And we see it again, even in like a spiritual sense with something like in Kabbalah, the Shekinah, having to go to the temple wall and commune with the feminine aspect of God. And it's a sexual act. For people who are not familiar, some Jewish people, they go to the wall and they have it's the Wailing Wall. They believe it's the temple wall, but it's not really the temple, but that's a whole other story. And they are praying, but they do this like kind of this swaying motion. And that is them communing with the female aspect of God. And that communion is not just like, hey, we're just loving this. They're actually copulating or having sex with that divine entity. So this temple prostitution, it permeates a lot even now.
Yes, I love this. There's a shape of something here that I've been really interested in for a while now. I would love to, you do your own interviews. Dr. Joanna Kuyava, I might have mentioned her to you previously, but I would love to hear you guys talk, and I can definitely connect you. But she is a scholar of religion, and she had a spontaneous Kundalini experience, which changed her life, and she was like, whoa, there is something here. There is something in the divine feminine. This is the reason it's not in our culture, because everything that has been suppressed brings personal power. This is why I think people who consider Gnosticism the bad thing are about as wrong as you can be. But knowledge of entropy, the principles of nature, astrology, another code that could be used to manage life in your own line if you wanted to. Well, you can't remove women from the system, but you can demonize them and belittle them and minimize them as much as you can and shame them and get them to cover the hell up. You can do all that stuff. You can encourage people to get married and never fuck with that kind of intention and just to procreate, and any other sex is strictly forbidden. As you say, how can it be that sex is the most divine, holiest union and also the most dangerous transgression? It is a paradox, but it's because there is a power that can be used there. And Dr. Kuyava, her whole thing is that there was a lineage of women who knew this and used their power to facilitate experiences. Because if sex can be a portal to the divine, what can a powerful portal operator do for you? They can probably get you off in ways that The ignorant wife can't, the starfished wife cannot do. They can probably really push the buttons and all that stuff. That's what we hear about. But the deeper level is like they can maybe move the energy in certain ways and help you to actually manifest through the use of being a conduit to the divine for you. That's really it. These divine prostitutes, these sacred prostitutes, they could be the conduit. And I think there's something there that even speaks to Epstein. Like, I read Virginia Giuffre's memoir, one of the most boring books about such a scandalous thing you could probably read. It's graphic in its language about actual touching and rape, but it doesn't go very deep into what was really going on. But she does talk about how Ghislaine was very methodical in coaching the women, the girls, to do this stuff to Epstein. He was like the model template you start with. And it always was massage-based. Well, Tantra's massage-based. So I think there might be something where without giving them the context, without telling them what they're doing, you put the girls through the motions. You say, he likes it like this. You do this way. And then you rent these girls out to other elites. Are they just getting their rocks off? Any prostitute can do that. These girls might be trained in a sacred art without even knowing it.
I can't agree more. I think that's exactly it. And I think that, again, with the manipulation of language, when we hear these words like prostitute, of course, there's like an element of just a commerce associated with, or morality of like, well, these girls were, whores or something. I mean, all of these things paint a picture. It obfuscates the truth, which is these are victims who were serving a function. It was not just, like you said, getting your rocks off. It's the same thing as all of this other that we've talked about where, yes, you have agriculture. Well, it's not about the agriculture. That's a consequence of this energy manipulation. So there's something else, though, at its core. And when we mistake the thing for the effect, when we mistake that, all this research into free energy is going to make it so that we can fly around in spaceships or go from point A to point B, yes, this is true and that could be good, but was that it? Was that the ends to the means? Or was there something else? Or is that what we're just given? Because they're always siphoning off the real value. And it's just like in archaeology, when I've said this for years, like they'll go in and do an excavation and the people with interest, they skim off that too. And that goes into a black market or their own, often collection. And then we get to see little potsherds and cute little like whatever. And it's like, oh, a museum. We're given that. We're given the leftovers. So while those leftovers we appreciate and we like, it's because we don't know any better. We're happy for what we're getting. We're getting something because they are giving it, because they're in a position to give it, because they're taking it. They're a priest class that have positioned themselves above us. And yes, to understand the importance of sex that way, even when you talk about it, it's just, almost comical, or it could be dirty, or it could be what you put your ethical framework over it. It's polluting the actual thing we're talking about. Because at the end, you'll say, well, why did they use ritual sex? And the answer most people will give is, well, because it felt good. Oh, okay. So do a lot of things. It also can feel not so good. There's a lot more to it. It's not just about the feeling, although that's there. It's like saying, why do you eat? Well, because my stomach felt not good and then I ate, it felt good. It's like, yeah, but there's so much more to it. And then it's like, well, why do we have sacrificial meals? And it's like, well, because I was hungry and eating feels good. You don't go to church and eat a Eucharist because you're hungry. There's more to it than that. And so you can't mistake the thing in front of you for what's actually going on. And so sex is key. And also that explains it's the most pleasure you can have. And the opposite of that is the most pain you can have, like torture. So ritual abuse and those sorts of things. You then maximize the potential for power and energy release, unfortunately, because you can torture to the point where it's just, and this is what we know from the Podesta emails, we know that this happens. Go into any, dark web red room and you'll know what they're doing. They're trying to create maximum pain. They're not going out and kidnapping people, not just children, but people. They're not going out and kidnapping and then just killing in a manner that is unreal to extract the most amount of pain and sexual energy as well. And it's brutal, but that's the real force that we're dealing with, are people who are trying to manipulate energy in ways that we just can't even understand because we use words like sex and energy and, sex feels good, and even tantra. It's like you got Sting back in the day coming out like,
Yeah.
I like tantric sex. And it's like, oh, he just takes his good old time with that foreplay. It's like, no, you understand what Tantra is. But that may threaten a belief set, so we can't do that either. That's why in the Substack, and well, in the paid one, unfortunately, and then in the deep dive, because I couldn't put it on YouTube, I went into the graphic detail about what is the actual communion that is given in the OTO and some of the Golden Dawn and some of these things. And a little too graphic for YouTube, but I thought it was important. And of course, I'm going to get hate mail for that. And I have, because these are secrets, but they're really not a secret. You can read Aleister Crowley for yourself, but people don't like it being known by those who, it's like the pearls before swine, they say. And I've been told that too. And it's like, okay, well, fine. We are all swine. We are all their animals. They got this system through animal husbandry technology. They tell us how to breed, what we can eat. They give us kibble. We are that. So we have to rise up against that.
So I know we got to wrap this up and I got to let you go eventually. I wanted to slide this in here too about Erica Kirk, because we could link this back to the sex post you had and some of what we were talking about there. Because you say the 3 big pillars of occult knowledge are weapons to destroy the body, glamour to enchant the mind, and sex to direct energy. Well, the beauty, the heavy makeup, the eyeliner, you've talked about this theme of beautiful models and pageant girls being traded around the elite and sex trafficked, Erica, Melania even. I mean, this is another area where I see kind of the modern pieces. I mean, I brought this up with Virginia and the Epstein training thing, but like maybe it goes deeper than that. Maybe there's more of these seductresses involved, or maybe they're trained to a degree, but it almost seems like a version of that like sacred prostitute thing, because maybe these women, they aren't just victims. I do think they graduate to a higher position that is less understood and probably does contain some power to it. Everyone just thinks Melania's a trophy wife, arm candy. I don't know. Maybe there's a deeper thing there. People try to decode her crazy outfits because there seems to be a lot of symbolism in those outfits. I don't know. What do you think about the idea that, because Erica, there's nothing that sticks out of my mind more about Erica Kirk than her crazy eyeliner.
The Tammy Faye Baker kind of thing going on. Yeah.
Maybe this is part of the magic, the glamour and all this enchantment type stuff. Maybe they aren't just arm candy.
I think that's the point that I try to make. And again, I'm not attacking anybody for wearing makeup. I wear makeup. I dye my hair. I do all that. So it's fine.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, right? It's more about the intent. And also just the literal sense of where the words come from and what we're working with. I do point out the idea because of glamour, because like you said, the thing that's popping out is when people talk about Erica, they're like those eyes, and there is a thing. You also hear, if you're on TikTok or wherever, there's a lot of people who put up makeup tutorials that say how to not look like a Republican, or how to look like it's like very divisive, these ideas of Republican makeup versus not. It's like, so people are very judgmental about like women and their makeup. But there's something I think important there. And that is this idea of what makeup is and how uncomfortable it can make people, because it's an illusion, it's fake, right? So if you look at the word glamour, which is glamorous, it's like beautiful, elegant, or it's like magazine cover names and whatever, but it actually comes to us from the English Scots dialect from the early 1700s. And so not what sometimes people call the Gaelic Scot, because this isn't the same one. This is a corruption of the word grammar. And you can find this if you go to the actual, in many dictionaries, you can just find this etymologically. You can find it on the government's own website of Scotland when they talk about the different words and whatnot. So very well sourced. The word comes from a corruption of the word grammar, which then also was from the Old French grammaire, which meant like the book of grammar or the book of magic. It's where we get like the word grimoire.
Grimoire, yeah.
Yeah. And so all of those, not to sound like a Jordan Maxwell where they all sound the same, don't they? No, they're traceably the same. I have citations for it on my Substack. It's traceable. It is the word. So essentially glamour means to cast a spell on somebody. It means that you're going to cast a glamour. That was the old way of saying it. What's interesting too is that's not even lost in the notion of theosophy or any of these. You have Alice Bailey writing a book about glamour, saying glamour, a world problem. And the way she was using it in the context was in this global sense, not even just about makeup, but in this notion that's an illusion. It's a beautiful illusion. And so often the word glamour has been used in this esoteric or occult way, and more often than not, really. And then only recently, I would say, it's been associated with Hollywood and makeup and the quote divine feminine, which is a tough one because you want to not be anti-woman. You want to give a woman her dues and how important she is and all of this. But I really feel that this divine feminine too has been another psyop that's been hijacked. And because I think it's a way to make us think one thing and not really see the relevance of the sex part and the magic and all of that. So at the risk of sounding like, I'm a hammer, so everything's a nail, I do think that a lot of this is a psyop. And so I want to be careful with the divine feminine, I guess.
Fair.
But what's interesting is that it comes from the watchers, the idea of the makeup itself, the idea that the watchers themselves taught women how to wear makeup. And it was kind of seen as black magic even back then.
Yeah, well, they're all witches, Heather. All
They're
of them.
all witches.
The Kardashians, Elon's mom,
Oh,
all
yeah.
the way down.
All the way down. Yeah.
Man, I definitely have loved this. Lucky number 3. I mean, I try to seek out people who have unique takes on these things that kind of are talked to death. And it's a very hard thing to do. So the fact that you have clarified a lot of complex things that other people have failed to, and connected dots in different ways that make a lot more sense to me. And yet we've still combed over this stuff for like 15, 20 years. I think that's just like as impressive as can be. Is there anything else to let people know before we let them go? Where you plan to take the work, what's coming out next, links, all that good stuff?
Well, I do plan to take the work a lot further. I have so much to say. As you can probably tell, I just like yammer on and on. But there's a lot. I feel like for the first time, I'm able to just say it all because we're in a state of actual world war, and like I'm just lighting a match and letting it all burn. I'm on a war path, quite literally, and I've had a lot of things over the past, I think, at least 13 years specifically that I've not been able to say. I probably still am not able to say safely, but I'm at that point where it's like, we're at war. This is a real war, and I've burned bridges. I've intentionally burning bridges. I'm on a whole different path. It is a war path, and that is what I'm doing on my Substack. And it's the only place I could find so far that will let me say some of the things I'm saying. And I'm able.
What about this?
Oh, no, definitely
I'm just
here.
kidding. I'm kidding.
No, in print.
I know.
So we'll see. And YouTube I've been using as well, but I can't put everything on YouTube. Unfortunately, as you know, some of that stuff does have to go behind a paywall just because they'll knock my channel down, and I've already had bot attacks already. So I think the thing that I would like to leave people with is I stand behind my previous work, but I've held a lot back for a lot of years. And I devoted myself to 2026 being the year where I burn it all down. And if I burn down with it, so be it. I think it's worth it in the truth. And so I have so much to say. This is only the beginning. And I look forward to sharing it all with everybody, hopefully.
I love it. Yeah, you got to be strategic. And the rest of us should support the people who are willing to do the work and put themselves in harm's way potentially. We know there are risks. So if you're not going to take the risks yourself, at least support the people who are willing to, because I am sick of not having the answers. I am sick of the runaround. I'm sick of the drip, drip, drip. We talked about disclosure. That's obviously a huge area where we get the drip, drip, drip. And I'm sure when it does come out, if it does, it'll be more about the pilots of the craft and not so much about like the free energy thing or the fact that this is a template baked into nature that we should all be able to thrive with in abundance, but it has been hijacked by that broker class. Well, thanks again for doing such great work. Take care until we talk again.
Thank you so much for having me, as always. And thank you to your audience, because it's where I get a whole lot of referrals. Everybody out there listening to your show, they're very much aware of what's going on behind the scenes. And I thank you for all the tips that they send me.
Oh man, well, be kind, people. Down, boys. Let's put our best foot forward. I can't be responsible for some of the animals out there, but I know they're really high level thinkers in this audience too. So I hope that only those are the ones that connect with you.
They do, for the most
part.
All
right. Cheers.
Thank you.
Take care. Ain't no party like a higher side party, right? Good Lord. I am just so consistently impressed with the work Dr. Lynn is doing. Like so many guests who I think are great writers, I try to come into the interview with as many quotes as I can fit in just to articulate to you guys exactly what it is that gets me so jazzed up about a lot of these guests. Usually, the written word is where it's put the best, so I try to bring that into the conversation at least. And this is a pretty quick turnaround for a THC. It was just recorded last week, but what a week it has been. The David Wilcox situation, and then this weird time travel story involving Cole Allen and the White House Correspondents' Dinner shooter situation. I don't want to go too much into it now because I just recorded with Chris Knowles yesterday, and it's basically a huge web of topics that bridge off of those two stories. But Heather has already released a couple of Substacks this week that are pretty killer that relate to these things. One about Project Looking Glass technology and our campaigns in the Middle East. I really liked that. She's got a part 2 coming. But in it, she mentions an angle I hadn't heard yet that Chris and I didn't go over, and that's that this event with Trump might have been staged by him to justify the ballroom he's building. It seems like that was the first thing they brought up the next day. This wouldn't have happened if we had our own secure ballroom at the White House. Problem, reaction, solution, right? But Heather also brings up a point I'm hearing more people talk about, and that is the fact that it's not about the ballroom per se. That's the Kansas City shuffle. Everyone's looking at the ballroom and not necessarily the bunker beneath. Although there might be some aesthetic homage to the Temple of Solomon or something, which might actually be required to be part of the overall thing if you're following every detail of an ancient story, including the architecture of a building. But be that as it may, the bunker below, what is that? What is its true purpose? Do they have a time machine? Or at least a device that can scry the future? That's the page I'm on. Not that people are taking their physical bodies and going through time. I think it's digital manipulation, data manipulation, some kind of influence that looks paranormal in the current timeline. Think of Interstellar. I mean, when he's pushing the books off the shelf from the astral, I think that might be something close to the technology they have. Really just a scrying mirror for the future. That's what I think it is. That's what I think Project Looking Glass is, and what that image is that they are showing us on the banner for that account of the time traveler on Twitter. But maybe there's a device that works on the same principle as remote viewing, and maybe it is very ancient. It's such wild stuff. I do think there's just something fishy about the time traveling Twitter account because it went so viral and it mythologizes the president, which has been going on since the first term, which is why it's a Keck picture. It brings it all back up again, the meme magic stuff. Like I said, I don't want to go too deep into it because the next episode is literally going to go quite deep into it. But we have a president who is an actor. He's always been a P.T. Barnum type figure who can direct attention. He's participated in reality TV and WWE, and I think that's his nature. And we have Elon Musk who likes juvenile 4chan flavored pranks and owns the platform that this all centers around. So when you mythologize a president as a time traveler, people overlook a lot of horrible shit just by the nature of distraction or the mystique of it all. The whole, well, there must be something to it that is understood on a higher level with these time travelers, and I guess I should just watch the show. I don't know. It's just a curious situation. But that's one perspective that I try to keep in mind, along with the more widely circulated ones, that we might be looking at weaponized meme magic or weaponized synchronicity to mythologize a president and exalt him a lot like they're trying to exalt AI. Just stuff to think about, really. But I brought up Bob Grenier a couple times in this interview, and I think Dr. Lynn is nailing it with the entropy idea. The idea of these codes and patterns and principles of nature being the big secret at the bottom of the Vatican archives or the Freemasonic basement library. We've known that sacred geometry and the like has been a huge part of it. Randall Carlson's a great example of someone who I've done interviews with who is quite proud to be a Mason and does go out there trying to teach people these principles. Maybe when membership is getting low, you got to send a guy out there to remind people what's so cool about it. But with Dr. Lynn, she's just nailing these principles that have been exploited and weaponized, and empire after empire has been built on exploiting them. So, of course, they keep them a carefully guarded secret. And Bob Grenier gave us a great reason to put stock in that when he showed his grandfather's Freemasonic regalia and medals and showed how these symbols that are on the medals are the same way energy organizes in these fusion systems that he's working on. So they've known. And I think the core of what this trick has been to invert our experience from a natural world just embedded within a system or many systems that just exude abundance if they're shepherded and that abundance is coaxed out. And they've had to take us completely out of that environment and keep us locked into artificial systems that engineer scarcity and create this perception of a scarce world, which is not its natural state. That really is the big conspiracy to me. Add in consciousness and our true nature, but I think you could fold that into inverting what we would arrive at naturally if we were living embedded in a natural environment. So they embarked on a lofty and long-term plan to separate us from all that. And oh, how successful it has been. People willingly pay over asking price to get into a neighborhood where you have barely any land and you will be fined for getting chickens or growing any food. That is the end result of this project, and it is goddamn impressive. Many people sign six-figure, 30-year commitments to live in a concrete box stacked on top of another one with no land at all, and probably an HOA on top of that. This is the stuff that kind of gets me excited again, and it brings me back to the roots of the conspiracy culture when I got into it, when it was about this abundance and scarcity dichotomy. Way before everything was just techno-Christianity, Silicon Valley bros, Q and AI gods, and the digital surveillance grid with programmable money, and time-traveling Trump. This is the stuff a person could actually use. It could become a guiding philosophy and has practical implications. As I said, I'm working on something related to this for a solo show that isn't just another book report. So I've been cultivating my thoughts on these things, and I was all excited about how this interview aligned with that. And she also made some great points in there that this techno-Christian cabal is pumping up AI as godlike because they want to be the mediators, the techno-priest class. It is a story as old as civilization itself, isn't it? But go and read her stuff, sign up for her Substack, and tell her you did it because her THC interviews are so great. That's one thing, the first half of the interview. And then we have her breakdown of the Charlie Kirk assassination ritual. Wow. So that was actually planned to be in the first hour because, to be honest, I know it would have gotten views on YouTube and all that. It's very trendy. And you can't fault me for at least considering being strategic, but it landed in the Plus show because the other stuff was just so interesting to me. We just kept talking about it. I had another comment and she had another comment. You know how conversations go. Though that stuff is far less trendy, it's probably more important, but man, I just love the way she framed that Charlie Kirk thing more so than anyone else. I've seen some of those pieces, as I mentioned, the right ear Trump thing. Yes, I've heard that, but man, just to follow that through to even more material that fits within a cohesive story. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. She's a great researcher. However, if you didn't hear the Plus show, you can read her Substack on that or check out her own YouTube for her breakdown or get the THC Plus free trial without even having to put in a credit card. Just go to thehighersidechats.com. But she tied it all together very nicely. It doesn't matter if you think the Butler situation involved a real bullet or a real shooting, or if Charlie Kirk is alive or dead. The ritual template still makes sense either way. Engineered theater or just engineered event, that I'm undecided on. But I think they know the value of story and narrative and are trying to work Trump into the groove of a certain archetype, and she provided great context for what that story and groove are. She's an excellent guest. Let her know. All right. In higher side news, I got out another solo show book report. I spilled some THC conspiracy and talked for almost 3 hours about this book, Too Many Secrets, Humanity's Fight to Expose the Secret Underground Worlds. So far, I haven't seen anyone actually obtain a copy of the book or find out anything about this author who has kind of ghosted the internet. But if you're a free listener wondering if it sucked or if it was good, the Plus people will always let you know with the rating system, and this book report has a 4.8. I love it. I love it. You can't please all the people all the time, but 4.8 is about as good as it gets. If I'm happy, you're happy, and it seems like you are. Get in there, free people. Use the trial. Scope out that 3-hour solo show. Hear the full Heather Lynn interview, and I think you'll find there's a lot of good stuff on the plus side of all of this. And without ads, it's the only system that works. So anyway, we also got to deliver a rating for the last interview I did, and that's the legend, Michael Cremo. Man, I am a little disappointed because I know that he's older and slower, but he's very wise and very well-spoken, and we so rarely get to speak to someone of that age, and he's still putting out books and willing to sit down for 2-hour interviews. I was really proud and honored, actually, to spend that time with him. I thought there would be a little more support and grace for his activeness at this age, but he's sitting at a 4.6. Not that bad. Still B tier. It's all good. But I thought he was great, and I'm happy to have his thoughts and words down on the record while we still have him around to do so. I know a lot of you are with me, but clearly more people than I thought ended up just not being that into it for whatever reason. And now the meetup calendar. May 1st, we have a Spavinaw, Oklahoma Camp Copperhead meetup. Also May 1st, Canaan, New Hampshire, Poorhouse Barbecue, the nudists getting together. May 5th, Brooklyn, New York at Heart Bar. May 16th, the Raleigh Brewing Company in Raleigh, North Carolina. And then June 13th, the Brickwood in Riverside, California. So, I don't know, a little light. It's summer. It's a good time to be out there. Let's pump it up a little bit. Get in there. Go forth and build the networks of the new world, people. Free and easy. Make events, an RSVP. If you heard about any events near you plan to attend. Take the reins on controlling your level of dependence on a broken system and cultivate your anti-fragility and all that. All right, well, enough lecturing, right? Who needs that? But I guess that's the end of the road for me. I loved this interview. I hope you agree. So enjoy the ride. Take care of you and yours. I've done my part. Your move. Entropy extractors, sex magic, secret keepers, and brotherhoods of hidden math. Your fucking move.
She enrolled, but she didn't buy in. She went to class, but saw through the spin. Got what she needed and got out again. The academic double agent, Dr. Heather Lynn. The professors say, keep the boat from rocking, keep the narratives intact. If you find something anomalous, there's something to subtract. Don't mess with success, we got the deck stacked. But when the truth comes knocking, how you gonna act? Today you learn more outside of the system. You can go out on your own, leave behind fancy credentials and crushing student loans. They won't fund your studies if you go against the grain. They got no cash for information they don't want to explain. The professors say keep the boat from rocking, keep the narratives intact. If you find something anomalous, there's something to subtract. Don't mess with success, we got the deck stacked. But when the truth comes knocking, how you gonna act? How you gonna act? She enrolled, but she didn't buy in. She went to class, but saw through the spin. Got what she needed and got out again. The academic double agent, Dr. Heather Lynn.